This is Eric Jacobson, and this is my presentation of my master's thesis in 2015. I studied the effects of hands-on laboratory activities on student achievement in a high school chemistry classroom. The reason that I decided to do this study, it was to determine if test scores were increased or decreased based on the laboratories that my students performed in the classroom. This would identify the benefits or drawbacks of those labs that were taking a lot of time during my classes, and actually, I was being motivated by my administration to do more laboratories, and parents wanted as many labs as could be done in my class. And I just wanted to see what effect those labs were having on my students. The research was done based on two junior chemistry classes where they both had the same instruction. We had the same guided notes during class. They were able to ask questions. We did the same group work activities. We even did some activities that I wouldn't consider to be lab activities, but they were some group activities, and they were out of their seat and moving around, and that part of the classroom was kept the same. The only difference was that in one class they did the labs during the course of the unit, after taking their pre-tests and before taking their post-test, while the other class performed the lab activities after they had already taken the post-test. So they basically had all of the in-class activities and instruction before they performed the lab activities. They used the same tests, the same surveys, all of those things were kept as close as I could to the same. What I found was that there really was no difference between the two classes in terms of their test scores. There was a slight difference, but you can see that it was so close, it was basically 5% difference, that with the number of students that I had in this study, you can't really conclusively say that there was an increase or decrease in the pre- and post-test scores. But what I was able to find is that there was a large difference in the student interest and the attitude that students had in my classroom based on if they were receiving those lab activities or if they weren't. What I found is that based on my notes and based on the surveys that students took, that there was a lot more discipline needed in the classes that didn't have labs, and the students that did have the labs enjoyed the chapter that we were going over on acids and bases a lot more than the students who did not have the lab activities. The other effect that was seen through the student surveys is those that had the lab activities felt much more comfortable with the lab glassware and equipment that was needed for these labs than were the students who didn't have the lab activities. So my conclusions are, in the end, we really saw that there was no noticeable effect on student test scores, that there was a large positive effect in student attitudes towards science and in the science classroom, that there was an increase in their procedural knowledge, meaning that, when they went into these lab activities, those who had performed the lab activity were a lot more comfortable with those procedures than those who hadn't. And the students who had performed those lab activities were a lot more confident in their abilities in that lab environment. For further study, I would recommend that I would like to see the effects of virtual lab activities, see if, students felt just as comfortable after using an online lab as they would be in a classroom lab, see if, that would be a wise use of class time, or if the actual labs are just as effective as virtual labs are. And I would like to see, what effect does devoting more time to labs have or less time to labs have. Other than just all labs or no labs, what if we increase lab time or decrease lab time? What would that what effect would that have on student learning and attitude towards science. So I appreciate your listening to my research, and I really enjoyed doing it this semester, and I enjoyed sharing it with all of you. I hope you have a great rest of your year and a great summer. Thanks.